James and Rachel Carter had poured their life savings into renovating the old barn for their furniture business. On their first day clearing the loft, Rachel spotted something massive wedged in the corner rafters. A nest nearly 3 feet wide, perfectly constructed in the beams. James climbed up with his phone to photograph it for identification. When he looked closer at what was moving inside, his hands started shaking. James and Rachel Carter had invested their savings into renovating the old barn. With their furniture business expanding, they needed a proper workshop. The barn belonged to Rachel's late grandfather and had been sitting empty for years. They had plans drawn up and materials ordered. This project would transform their business. On that first morning, they arrived ready to work. The upper loft needed clearing first. Rachel climbed the ladder while James started hauling boxes from below. Then Rachel stopped moving. She stood perfectly still, staring at the corner rafters. James called up to ask if she was okay. She just pointed toward the shadows. James climbed up to see what had caught her attention. Wedged into the corner beams sat an enormous nest. The structure measured nearly 3 feet across, woven from branches and grass. He had never seen anything like it. But the size wasn't what made his breath catch. Something was moving inside. James pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight. Large eggs sat in the nest, shifting slightly. His hands trembled as he took photos. Rachel asked what he was doing. James told her he wanted to identify the bird species later. They went back to work, but both kept glancing toward the rafters. Throughout the day, they heard strange calls echoing from outside. Sharp cries neither of them recognized. James suggested it was probably just the rural location. That night, James uploaded his photos and started searching. Bird identification websites, nature forums, wildlife databases. He compared wing patterns and egg sizes. Hours passed while he scrolled through results. The next day, he barely spoke. Rachel tried to start conversations, but James gave short answers. That evening, he was back at the computer. This pattern continued for days. James became withdrawn and distant. Rachel watched him sink deeper into whatever he had discovered, but every time she asked, he brushed her off. By the end of the week, Rachel confronted him directly. She demanded to know what was happening. James looked at her for a long moment, then opened his laptop. He showed her the photos and comparison images. The nest belonged to a species of hawk that hadn't been documented in their region for over 15 years. Conservation groups had declared them locally extinct. If this was real, it was an ecological miracle. Rachel felt excitement surge through her, but James wasn't smiling. He pulled up another web page, State Wildlife Protection Laws. Rachel's excitement faded as James explained. If they reported an endangered species actively nesting on their property, everything would change. The state could impose severe restrictions. Their renovation would stop immediately. They might lose access to the barn entirely. All their savings, all their plans, suddenly hung in the balance. The next morning, they stood in the barn, staring up at that corner. A magnificent hawk swooped through the door and landed on the nest. The bird was beautiful, with powerful wings and fierce eyes. It settled onto the eggs with careful precision. James broke the silence. He said they should wait until after the birds left for the season. Then they could quietly remove the nest and claim they never saw it. Nobody would ever know. Rachel wanted to argue, but the financial reality pressed down on her. They had put everything into this venture. She nodded slowly, hating herself as she agreed. Days crawled by. Each morning they watched the hawk return. Each evening, they avoided talking about their decision. The guilt sat between them like a wall. James grew quieter. Rachel found herself crying at random moments. 2 weeks passed in terrible silence. They continued working in other parts of the barn, but the loft remained untouched. Then one morning, James woke to a new sound, cracking, soft but distinct. He rushed to the barn and climbed the ladder. The eggs were hatching. Tiny breaks appeared in the shells. He stood there watching, and something inside him broke too. He climbed down, pulled out his phone, and called the wildlife department before he could change his mind. Within hours, their property was swarming with people. Biologists arrived with equipment. Officials asked questions and took notes. Everyone seemed stunned. They kept saying the same thing. "We thought these birds were gone from here." James and Rachel stood together, waiting for the news they dreaded. They braced themselves to hear about restrictions and possible loss of their property rights. But then one of the biologists made a different discovery. He had been examining the barn structure when he found something behind a loose panel in the wall. Old shipping crates with foreign labels, specialized cages, and a ledger, its pages yellowed with age. The biologist called over his colleagues. They pulled out the items carefully. James and Rachel watched as the team began reading through the ledger. Dates, locations, species names, lists of transactions. Finally, one of them approached the couple. He asked how much Rachel knew about her grandfather's activities. Rachel said very little. He had died when she was young. The official explained what they had found. The records revealed an illegal exotic bird trafficking operation. Rachel's grandfather had been part of it decades ago. The ledger documented years of criminal activity, but there was more. The records showed that someone had released breeding pairs of several species onto the property. The hawks were among them. Whether it was Rachel's grandfather trying to make amends or an associate abandoning evidence, they would never know. But someone had set these birds free on this land years before the old man died. The official continued talking. Because the bird's presence was directly tied to illegal activity, different rules applied. The property would need protection for the nesting site, but the couple wouldn't face the harshest restrictions. They could eventually renovate the barn, just not immediately, and there would be certain limitations to protect the habitat, but they wouldn't lose everything. James felt relief wash over him, followed immediately by shame. Relief that their business wasn't destroyed, shame that he had been willing to hide the truth. Rachel stood silently, processing the revelation about her grandfather. The man she barely remembered had been a criminal, but his crime had accidentally created something precious, a second chance for a vanishing species. They both looked up as the first tiny chick broke free from its shell. The baby bird was wet and fragile, barely moving, but it was alive. James reached for Rachel's hand. They realized how close they had come to destroying something irreplaceable for their own gain. 2 weeks of silence, 2 weeks of knowing what was right and choosing what was easy. Their barn renovation would wait. Their business plans would need adjusting. But watching new life emerge from that massive nest, they both knew they had made the right choice, even if it had taken them too long to make it. What would you have done if you discovered something that could cost you everything you had worked for?